سور إرشادك علي ثورة جديدة تشيل ما تخلي.
I'm quite used to regimes imprisoning people just because they are protesting against them. And I was actually born while my dad was in prison. The court sentenced him to 5 years imprisonment. So he and my mother decided that to make the coming years easier on him and her, they would have another baby. They hid away from the police for a couple of months till they made sure she was pregnant in me. And then my dad went and turned himself in. So my first 3-4 years of childhood were while my dad was in prison. And so I grew into that. In 2010, the scene changed in Egypt for the youth, especially for people from my age, with the death of Khaled Said, who was our age and who was beaten to death by police informants. And a wave of protest started in the street. And this was really, like I worked on the ground a bit before, but this was a life-changing experience for me and a lot of people from my age. We had a sit-in in front of the parliament on 25th of February 2011. And up until that point, people believed the army were on the side of the revolution. And this was the first time the army actually violently and publicly put an end to a protest. We saw them dragging a young man and they were beating him really, really violently. And he wasn't resisting at all. They wanted to frame him for possession of a gun. Because I was there, I felt responsible. I started following up with the lawyer, and the first day the lawyer went to the military court, he called me back and he said, Amr is not the only case. I'm seeing tens of families here who are telling the same stories of their kids being taken from small fights, from random arrests in the streets, of them being sentenced without any lawyers and really harsh sentences, 3 and 5 and 10 years. We really did not know how deep this battle is, and we thought it's a matter of weeks, but it turned out to be much bigger than that. So we started no military trials for civilians.
The irony is that after the popular uprising of January 2011, the military then stepped in and took control. So for a year and a half, we really saw the face of the military for the first time. We got to know the military in Egypt because they were involved in law enforcement and they were making all the political decisions. They monopolized decision-making power. So over 2011, over more than 12,000 civilians were tried before military tribunals.
Not even Mubarak managed to do that number in the 30 years he ruled. We have generations of people working in all the governmental institutions, whether police or army or even other governmental institutions, who know nothing about how to do their jobs and only about how to force their way through. I don't think even anyone, whether in police or in army, know how to deal with things any other way.
طيب دلوقتي احنا رافعين قضيه عشان موضوع العفو الشامل اللي هو ما شملش اي حد من المحاكمين عسكريا، وبنحاول نجيب يعني حد من كل حدث نضيفه على القضيه عشان يعني لو قدرنا ان يستفيدوا منها كلهم، فبنحاول نجيب من الفتره الاولانيه بنحاول نجيب من عصام 9 مارس الى اخره. فتفتكر ابو معاطي بقى عنده استعداد يتضاف على قضيه زي دي ولا لا؟
A military trial is not a real trial. It's really just a theater. It's a play, and it really is about pressure and publicity and media pressure. Those people who can maintain media pressure and who have connections get out of a military trial very easily, and that's why we have the major bulk of the victims of military trials are really not even activists, not human rights activists, not revolutionaries. Most of them are underprivileged people who their unfortunate luck sent them in a confrontation in front of the army, and therefore they are still in prison. At the beginning of the revolution and the beginning of our work, I hated how people obsessed about social media. At one point I remember I was saying I would never ever answer interviews who asked me about social media, women's role, and fear of Islamists. These were like the three main questions of all Western media. But the tools of social media, whether Twitter or Facebook, have been extremely empowering to us. It helps us do an internal network, organize things, distribute information among this, and counter any wrong information that we see distributed in the main media. But the whole point of our campaign, No Military Trials, is making things personal. People needed to see these victims as stories, as details, as people they could relate to, not as a news item that says 8 thugs were being referred to military trial and they are sent to prison. And so to do that, each one of us follows specific cases from the beginning till the end. We visit the families, we go with them sometimes to the prison and so on. And sometimes it gets really too tough and too dark that you hide away for a bit to re-energize. But I think you can always be optimistic as long as people are struggling and resisting and not silent. And I've seen that, like, there are so many things that's happening that makes it, even though they seem very little, but they are very empowering. If you ask most people in this revolution, they would tell you Mona Seif is a lawyer, but I'm not. I learned law just by, I learned the legal terms just by working on military trials and following with lawyers, and my dad is a lawyer. I'm a master's student in Cairo University in Faculty of Science, working on a research project on breast cancer and genetics. But there's this raw that, at the end of the time, this is an epic time what we are in, and I cannot ignore that I have a responsibility to finish what I'm doing, because the ultimate goal is to get a country in which I can have kids and not fear for them from police or army or wrongful detention or torture, and in which they can actually do the jobs they want to do and not be harassed by doing it and so on. I'm not sure I'll be able to actually live that. But I'm sure we are working towards that. So if it's not me, then my kids or my grandchildren or whatever. I don't know.